I was standing 3 feet behind my father when he told a room full of investors that I was just the mechanic, not the architect of the system, not the lead developer, not the person who spent 10 years sleeping beside hospital servers and FDA audit folders. Just the mechanic. My brother leaned against the launch stage railing, glass of champagne in hand, smiling like he owned the building. He had flown in late, hungover, and somehow still ended up center frame on every camera. The screens behind us flashed $1.3 billion acquisition complete. Applause thundered through the ballroom. My mother squeezed my arm gently, the way you comfort a child who doesn't belong in adult conversations. No one noticed when my access badge deactivated. No one noticed when security stepped closer. But I noticed everything, and I understood, in that moment, exactly what they had decided to do with me. Before I tell you how my own family tried to erase me from a company I built with my bare hands, let me ask you something. Have you ever been quietly replaced in your own life? My name is Kayla. I'm not dramatic. I don't raise my voice. I don't fight in public. I design systems. And for 10 years, I designed one that saved lives, while my parents slowly taught the world to believe it belonged to my brother. What happened next wasn't loud. It was procedural, and it changed everything. For most of my adult life, I existed in the background of my own company. Officially, my title was Systems Integration Lead. Unofficially, I was the person everyone called when something broke at 3 a.m. I handled biometric calibration errors. I rebuilt corrupted patient logs. I sat in windowless rooms with compliance officers and hospital administrators, walking them through safety protocols line by line. I didn't mind the invisibility. I believed in the work. Our platform connected biometric identification with medical records, reducing medication errors, preventing identity mismatches, and giving emergency rooms instant, verified access to patient histories. It wasn't flashy. It was precise. Lives depended on it. My parents handled the business side. My father liked presentations and press releases. My mother curated donor dinners and photo ops. My brother floated between roles, strategy 1 month, partnerships the next, depending on which rehab he'd just come back from. I wrote the code. I built the authorization layers. I created the compliance framework that allowed hospitals to legally deploy the system. At home, I was the reliable one, the quiet daughter, the problem solver, the backup plan. I paid vendors when my brother forgot. I covered payroll gaps. I smoothed over investor concerns when he missed meetings. When regulators requested documentation, I delivered it in clean folders with time-stamp logs. No one thanked me. They didn't have to. I thought contribution was protection. I thought loyalty worked both ways. I didn't understand yet that in our family, usefulness mattered more than ownership, and silence was interpreted as consent. The disrespect didn't arrive all at once. It crept in through small omissions. My name stopped appearing on internal reports. Vendor emails began copying my brother instead of me. During investor calls, my father would summarize my technical briefings in his own words, trimming out the parts that made it clear I was the one holding everything together. At first, I told myself it was optics. He liked to keep things simple for outsiders. But then came the launch rehearsals. I was assigned a seat behind the production console instead of on stage. My brother was given a wireless mic he didn't know how to use. When I corrected a data point during a run-through, my mother pulled me aside and whispered, "Let your father handle the narrative." Narrative. That word stayed with me. My brother started referring to the platform as his baby in casual conversations. Investors laughed. My parents didn't correct him. Once, during a compliance review, a hospital administrator asked a technical question only I could answer. Before I could speak, my father stepped in and said, "Our engineer will follow up." Engineer. Not daughter. Not architect. Not founder. Just engineer. I began noticing patterns. How my brother was praised for showing up. How I was expected to fix things, quietly. How credit moved upward while responsibility flowed down. Still I stayed. Because the system mattered. Because patients mattered. Because somewhere inside me, there was still a small belief that my parents would eventually do the right thing. I didn't know yet that they were already preparing contracts without my name. Or that access privileges were being quietly reassigned. Or that they had started telling people I was replaceable. I was too busy keeping hospitals online. The day of the acquisition announcement, my brother arrived late again. He walked into the ballroom adjusting his cufflinks like he belonged there, kissed my mother on the cheek, shook hands with men he didn't recognize, and accepted congratulations for milestones he couldn't explain. No one challenged it. My father led the presentation. Slide after slide praised visionary leadership and strategic growth. My brother's photo appeared beside every future projection. I sat near the back with the operations team, answering last-minute questions about data redundancy and biometric failsafes. When a hospital CIO pulled me aside to thank me personally for stabilizing their emergency intake system, my mother intercepted and redirected him to my brother. "He oversees the whole platform now," she said brightly. That was new. During the Q&A, an investor asked about federal safety compliance and biometric authorization hierarchy. My father gestured vaguely toward me and said, "Our technical staff has it handled." Technical staff. As if I were a department. After the speeches, champagne glasses clinked. Cameras flashed. My brother told a story about scaling partnerships while mispronouncing the name of our core encryption protocol. People laughed politely. I watched contracts being signed on sleek glass tables. I watched lawyers exchange folders. I watched a valuation number flicker across the screens. $1.3 billion. No one made eye contact with me. Then my father leaned in close and said quietly, without looking at my face, "Security will walk you out after this. HR has your termination packet." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. He told me I'd be compensated fairly for my time. 10 years of architecture. 10 years of regulatory navigation. 10 years of building something that literally could not function without my authorization layer. I opened my mouth to speak. My mother placed a hand on my arm and whispered, "Please don't make a scene." So I didn't. I handed over my badge and walked out of the building I helped design. They believed silence meant surrender. The first night after they fired me, I sat on the floor of my apartment with my laptop closed and my phone face down. I didn't cry. I stared at the wall and replayed every meeting in my head, looking for the moment I should have spoken louder. My inbox filled with automated offboarding emails. My health access was terminated. My work calendar vanished. A generic HR message thanked me for my contributions. Contributions. That word again. My brother texted once. Nothing personal. Business is business. My mother left a voicemail telling me she hoped I would take this time to reflect. Reflect on what? On being erased? Friends from the company stopped replying. A compliance analyst I'd worked beside for years sent a short message saying he wasn't allowed to communicate anymore. I started doubting myself. Maybe I should have demanded equity earlier. Maybe I should have insisted on public credit. Maybe I had been naive to believe competence protected me. But even in the middle of that quiet collapse, I noticed something strange. No one had asked me to transfer biometric authorization. No one had requested my cryptographic keys. They had removed my email. They had removed my badge. But the system's core safety layer was still tied to my credentials. Federal rules required a licensed architect's biometric approval for every major operational change. And that architect was still me. I lay awake that night reading through compliance statutes and deployment agreements I'd personally written years earlier. Everything was still intact. Legally, they had sold the company. They had fired me. But they had not secured the one approval the platform could not function without. They thought I was replaceable. They thought the code was just software. They didn't understand that I had designed it to require human authorization. Not out of ego. Out of safety. And for the first time since the ballroom, I stopped feeling confused. I started feeling alert. 3 days later, headlines started appearing. Family-owned medtech firm completes historic acquisition. Visionary leadership drives $1.3 billion exit. My brother's photo was everywhere. My father gave interviews about innovation. My mother talked about legacy. They framed the sale as a generational achievement, a story of unity and perseverance. No one mentioned me. Then came the legal notice. A courier delivered a thick envelope claiming I had violated company protocol by withholding system credentials. They accused me of attempting to sabotage operations and demanded immediate transfer of all authorization layers. Attached was a draft lawsuit. They weren't just erasing me. They were setting me up. My hands shook as I read through the allegations. They had positioned my termination as cause-based. They implied malicious intent. They suggested that any disruption to hospital operations would be my responsibility. I realized what they were doing. They had sold the platform without understanding its regulatory dependencies. Now that deployment updates were failing, they needed someone to blame. And that someone was me. An hour later, a reporter emailed asking for comment on technical resistance from a disgruntled former employee. My parents had already started shaping the narrative. For a moment, I thought I had lost everything. My career, my reputation, my family. They had money, lawyers, media access. I had a small apartment and a compliance handbook. It felt uneven. It felt hopeless. But that night, as I reviewed the acquisition documents line by line, something surfaced. The buyer had agreed to federal safety continuation clauses. Any biometric system interruption required architect verification. Without it, operations had to legally suspend. I hadn't blocked anything. The system was simply doing exactly what the law required. And suddenly, their billion-dollar victory didn't look as stable as it appeared on television. I didn't respond to the lawsuit draft. I didn't call my parents. I didn't correct the articles. Instead, I opened my old project drives and began organizing 10 years of documentation. Every compliance audit, every authorization protocol, every time-stamped biometric approval. I rebuilt timelines. I highlighted clauses. I downloaded archived email threads showing who designed which systems and who approved which deployments. I remembered why I had structured the platform this way in the first place. Medical technology doesn't forgive shortcuts. Hospitals depend on certainty. Regulators demand traceability. Every access point had to be accountable to a licensed human authority. That authority had always been me. Not because my family trusted me. Because no one else wanted the responsibility. My brother couldn't pass the licensing exams. My father didn't understand encryption. My mother avoided technical conversations entirely. They had built a company around my competence while convincing themselves they owned it. I made coffee and worked through the night. I didn't panic. I observed. They began sending aggressive emails through attorneys. I replied once, politely. I stated that under federal safety compliance, biometric authorization could not be transferred without proper regulatory filing and verification. I offered to cooperate once lawful procedures were initiated. They stopped writing. Silence followed. Not the calm kind. The strained kind that happens when people realize something expensive is no longer moving forward. I knew they were scrambling behind closed doors, calling consultants, pressuring engineers, looking for a way around me. There wasn't one. I wasn't fighting them. I was simply standing exactly where the law had placed me. It didn't take long for the pattern to fully reveal itself. My brother began posting motivational quotes on social media about resilience and leadership. My parents started attending investor dinners again, smiling for photos, pretending everything was on track. Behind the scenes, hospitals were reporting stalled updates. System upgrades required biometric validation. Without it, deployment froze. Emergency departments could still access existing records, but expansion into new facilities had stopped completely. Contracts were being delayed. Integration schedules collapsed quietly, one by one. No public announcement. Just friction. Then came the phone calls. Not from my family. From third-party vendors asking if I was still authorized. From compliance officers who recognized my name on the original filings. From a former project manager who whispered that my brother had tried to manually override security layers and triggered an automatic audit flag. That one made me sit up straight. I pulled the logs. There it was. Unauthorized access attempts. Improper credential usage. A failed attempt to bypass biometric verification using legacy admin privileges that no longer existed. They weren't just confused. They were panicking. And panic makes people careless. For the first time, I stopped viewing this as personal betrayal and started seeing it as operational exposure. They had sold a federally regulated system without securing its licensed architect. They had promoted someone with a documented addiction history into executive oversight. They had attempted unauthorized access on a medical platform governed by strict safety statutes. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. It was compliance territory. And compliance doesn't care about blood. It cares about records. I felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Clarity. They had underestimated the difference between owning shares and owning structure. They thought control came from contracts. I knew it came from architecture. And suddenly, Every quiet hour I'd spent documenting protocols felt like preparation. Not for revenge, for inevitability. There's something most people don't understand about regulated medical systems. They don't run on trust. They run on documentation. Every deployment has a chain of custody. Every authorization carries a biometric signature. Every compliance milestone leaves behind a trail. Who approved it? When, under which license, and with what credentials? I had built that trail. Quietly. Years earlier, when my father pushed for faster rollouts, I insisted on layered authorization. When my brother complained about too many safeguards, I logged every objection. When investors asked about scalability, I embedded federal continuity clauses directly into the operational code. Not to protect myself, to protect patients, which, unintentionally, also protected me. I had archived copies of deployment approval histories, encrypted biometric hashes tied to my identity, compliance submissions bearing my digital signature, emails where I warned against removing human verification, meeting minutes showing my brother declining regulatory training. I also had something else. A standing relationship with an independent compliance auditor who had reviewed our platform twice during early hospital pilots. He knew my work. He knew the architecture. And when he called to ask why credential updates were suddenly failing, I didn't accuse anyone. I simply sent him the logs. Meanwhile, my brother was telling investors there were minor integration delays. My parents were blaming me for being uncooperative, and their legal team was drafting cease and desist letters. They didn't realize that attempted biometric overrides automatically triggered regulatory monitoring alerts. They didn't realize that under federal medical safety law, unauthorized access attempts elevated the issue from internal dispute to external investigation. They didn't realize that their scramble was already being time-stamped. I didn't contact the authorities. I didn't file complaints. I didn't leak documents. I let the system do what it was designed to do. Report irregularities, flag violations, escalate when safeguards were breached. They thought I was withholding cooperation. In reality, they were generating evidence. And every careless move they made was being quietly preserved. Something shifted in me during that week. Not emotionally, structurally. I stopped checking social media. I stopped rereading old messages from my parents. I stopped rehearsing imaginary arguments in my head. I treated the situation the way I treated any system failure. Identify variables, track behaviors, wait for predictable errors. I realized how much energy I had wasted over the years trying to be understood, trying to be fair, trying to be included. None of that mattered anymore. What mattered was accuracy. They were telling a story to the outside world. I was maintaining an operational truth. And those two things always collide eventually. I also noticed how calm I felt. Not numb. Focused. I started exercising again. I cooked actual meals. I slept in full stretches instead of dozing between alerts. I reviewed legal frameworks the way I used to review code. Slowly, methodically, without panic. I hired a quiet attorney who specialized in regulatory compliance, not litigation theater. She didn't promise revenge. She asked for documentation. I gave it to her in organized folders with labeled timestamps. She nodded once and said, "They've already crossed multiple thresholds." I didn't feel triumphant. I felt prepared. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to my family. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I wasn't seeking validation. I was simply holding my position inside a system that required my authorization to function. They had built their empire on the assumption that I would stay invisible. They were about to learn the difference between being quiet and being absent. And I finally understood something fundamental. Power doesn't announce itself. It waits. I didn't move quickly. That's the mistake people make when they finally realize they've been wronged. They rush. I didn't. I let my attorney initiate formal correspondence requesting proper regulatory filing for biometric authorization transfer. The letter was polite, neutral, procedural. It outlined exactly what federal safety compliance required and attached the necessary forms. They ignored it. Instead, their lawyer sent back a threat-heavy response accusing me of obstruction and intellectual property theft. My attorney forwarded it to the compliance auditor. That single email shifted the terrain. Because now there was documented proof that the company was attempting to pressure a licensed architect to bypass safety procedures. Meanwhile, Hospitals began escalating concerns through their own legal departments. Integration timelines were failing. Expansion contracts were being paused. One medical network temporarily froze onboarding entirely. The buyers started asking questions. Not emotional questions. Financial ones. Why was deployment stalled? Why were authorization attempts failing? Why was there a flagged audit event tied to executive credentials? My brother tried to host emergency strategy meetings. He couldn't answer technical questions. My father reassured investors without explaining details. My mother focused on optics. None of them addressed the core issue. They didn't have lawful control of the platform. I prepared for every outcome. I organized witness statements from engineers who knew I built the authorization layers. I archived screen recordings of access attempts. I collected licensing documentation showing my credentials were current and exclusive. I did not speak publicly. I did not retaliate. I waited, because systems under pressure reveal character, and people under pressure reveal crimes. They were still operating as if this were a family dispute. They hadn't grasped that they were now inside a regulated environment with automatic escalation pathways. Their arrogance was doing the work for me. All I had to do was stay still. They invited me back to headquarters under the pretense of resolution talks. Same glass walls. Same polished floors. Same conference room where I used to explain safety protocols to people who pretended to listen. Only now the atmosphere was different. No champagne. No cameras. Just tension. My brother sat at the head of the table, tapping his pen too fast. My father avoided my eyes. My mother kept offering water like hospitality could undo legal exposure. Their legal team outlined a proposal. They would reinstate me temporarily as a consultant. They would pay a transition bonus. All I had to do was sign over biometric authorization. I asked one question. Have you completed regulatory transfer filings? Silence. Their attorney said they were in progress. I nodded and explained calmly that without completed filings and third-party verification, federal safety rules prohibited credential reassignment. My brother leaned forward. You're holding hospitals hostage. I looked directly at him for the first time in weeks. No, I said. Your unauthorized access attempts triggered safety locks. That's documented. His face changed. My father finally spoke. You're tearing this family apart. I didn't respond to that. I asked for copies of their compliance submissions. They didn't have them. I stood up. I told them my attorney would continue communications through proper channels. As I walked out, I passed engineers who wouldn't meet my eyes. They knew. In the parking lot, my phone vibrated. It was the compliance auditor. He told me regulators had formally opened an inquiry. He told me the buyer's risk committee was involved. He told me someone had submitted evidence showing attempted credential bypass from an executive account. I sat in my car with my hands on the steering wheel and felt something quiet and final settle into place. They had brought me back to intimidate me. Instead, they had confirmed everything. Once the inquiry started, they stopped pretending. My brother began sending me aggressive messages, accusing me of destroying years of work. My father left voicemails, warning me about consequences. Their lawyers escalated to formal demands. Then my brother made his biggest mistake. He attempted one more override. This time, using a contractor's credentials. The system flagged it instantly, because I had built redundancy into the monitoring layer. Biometric mismatch. Unauthorized privilege elevation. Executive IP address. All logged. That single action triggered mandatory reporting under medical safety statutes. Hospitals were notified. The buyer froze funds in escrow. Regulators requested full access records. And suddenly, what they thought was a private power struggle became a public compliance event. My attorney received notice that a federal review board had scheduled emergency hearings. My parents tried damage control. They issued a press statement blaming a disgruntled former employee. They claimed operational sabotage. They suggested I had emotional motives. But they couldn't explain why their own executive credentials were tied to the breach. They couldn't explain why the authorization architecture legally required my biometric approval. They couldn't explain why compliance warnings had been ignored for months. An investor called me directly. He had reviewed early pitch decks. He had seen my name on foundational documentation. He wanted to understand why the architect had been fired before the sale. I told him the truth. Quietly. I forwarded him meeting minutes, email threads, licensing confirmations. He thanked me and said he would escalate internally. Within hours, the buyer initiated an independent forensic audit. My brother stopped texting. My parents stopped calling. Everything went through attorneys, but the damage was already moving faster than they could spin it. Their confidence had turned into recklessness. Their recklessness had become evidence. They had assumed control meant dominance. They forgot control requires permission. And permission leaves records. The hearing took place over video. No grand courtroom. No dramatic speeches. Just a grid of serious faces and a shared screen filled with logs. The compliance board opened with a timeline. Unauthorized access attempts. Failed credential overrides. Executive IP addresses. Ignored safety alerts. Each entry was dated. Each entry was sourced. My brother tried to speak. He blamed contractors. He blamed legacy systems. He blamed me. Then the forensic auditor took control of the presentation. He highlighted the biometric authorization architecture. He explained, slowly and clearly, that the platform was designed to require a licensed human architect's biometric confirmation for operational changes. He pulled up my credentials. Active. Valid. Exclusive. He showed early design documents bearing my digital signature. He displayed emails where I warned against removing safeguards. He presented evidence that my brother had declined regulatory training and later attempted unauthorized overrides. The room went quiet. My father tried to argue that I was just an employee. The auditor corrected him. No, he said. She is the registered system architect. That distinction landed heavily. Then the investor spoke. He confirmed that the acquisition agreement required uninterrupted regulatory compliance. He confirmed that my termination had not been disclosed prior to closing. He confirmed that executives had misrepresented operational readiness. My parents stared at their screens. My brother looked down. I said very little. I answered questions when asked. I provided documentation when requested. I did not raise my voice. At the end, the compliance board issued preliminary findings. Immediate operational suspension pending review. Referral to federal authorities for potential fraud and safety violations. Escrow funds frozen. Executive access revoked. The buyer terminated the acquisition agreement on the call. Just like that, a billion-dollar deal dissolved in under 3 minutes. My brother's face drained of color. My father started speaking and was muted by the moderator. My mother covered her mouth. I closed my laptop and sat in silence. Truth didn't explode. It arrived. The fallout didn't take long to surface. Within 24 hours, hospitals began terminating contracts. Medical networks issued statements about patient safety. Industry publications ran headlines questioning leadership integrity. The buyer formally withdrew. Investors demanded accountability. Board members resigned. My parents held a press conference. My father spoke about misunderstandings. My mother talked about emotional strain. My brother didn't appear. It didn't matter. The forensic audit findings were already circulating. Unauthorized access attempts, misrepresentation of executive oversight, failure to disclose termination of the registered architect, potential insurance violations. Their story couldn't compete with timestamps. Federal agents arrived at headquarters 2 days later. Not loudly, quietly. They collected servers. They requested employee interviews. They secured financial records. My brother tried to frame me again through his attorney, claiming I had intentionally withheld cooperation. That argument collapsed when my lawyer submitted documented proof that I had repeatedly offered lawful compliance pathways. I watched the footage online. My parents exiting their own building with legal counsel. My brother being escorted through a side door. The same entrance he once strutted through with champagne in his hand. I didn't celebrate. I felt a strange sense of stillness. Not victory. Resolution. They had taken credit for my work. They had erased me publicly. They had tried to make me the villain. And now their empire was unraveling under the weight of their own shortcuts. I had never raised my voice. I had simply stayed inside the law. And the law had done the rest. The arrests didn't happen on the same day. They never do. First came my brother. Financial fraud tied to executive misrepresentation. Unauthorized system access. Evidence of concealed substance-related incidents during operational oversight. He was taken in outside his apartment complex while neighbors watched from balconies. Then my father, charged with investor fraud and regulatory concealment. The footage showed him being guided into an unmarked vehicle, still wearing the same tailored coat he used to wear on stage. My mother wasn't arrested that week. She was subpoenaed, her donor accounts were frozen, her nonprofit affiliations quietly distanced themselves. Social invitations stopped arriving. The company was officially shut down under federal medical safety statutes. Hospitals migrated to emergency alternatives. Insurance carriers pulled coverage. The buyers sued for damages. What had once been a billion-dollar empire became a case study in executive misconduct. Reporters tried to reach me. I declined interviews. I let filings speak. I let documents circulate. I let court records tell the story. My attorney confirmed that I was cleared of all allegations. The compliance board issued a formal statement recognizing me as the platform's original architect and affirming that my actions had prevented unsafe deployment. They didn't call me brave. They called me correct. And that was enough. 3 weeks later, something unexpected surfaced. One of the early investors, the same one who had escalated the forensic audit, contacted my attorney. During due diligence, his team had uncovered a silent equity transfer my parents thought no one would ever notice. Years earlier, when I first registered the Biometric Authorization Framework, I had also been listed as the platform's originating intellectual architect in a provisional patent filing. My father had delayed converting it to a full patent. He didn't think it mattered. He assumed ownership meant control. But when the acquisition paperwork unraveled, that provisional filing resurfaced. Legally, publicly, it showed that the core authorization architecture, the heart of the system, had never been formally reassigned, which meant something extraordinary. Even after the sale, even after my termination, even after all the headlines, the most valuable component of the company had still been mine. The buyer couldn't claim it. My parents couldn't transfer it. My brother couldn't touch it. The investor offered to back a new venture built on that architecture, this time under my name, with clean governance and independent oversight. No family, no shortcuts, no optics over safety. I accepted, not out of revenge, out of alignment. Court proceedings continued without me needing to appear. My brother accepted a plea agreement. My father's case moved toward trial. My mother cooperated to reduce exposure. They lost the company. They lost their reputations. They lost access to the system they once used to silence me. I didn't stand on any stage to announce victory. I signed incorporation documents in a quiet office. I hired engineers who respected process. I rebuilt carefully. Months later, when my new platform passed its first regulatory audit, I stood in the server room alone and placed my hand on the biometric scanner. It recognized me instantly, not because of blood, not because of loyalty, because I had built it that way. They taught the world I was just the mechanic. But mechanics understand how systems fail, and architects understand how they rise. This time, I walked forward without carrying anyone who had tried to break me.